Welcome to another video. Today is the 26th of February. Today I'm going to be doing a relatively quick update just about the Donetsk sector and also about the Bakhmut front, because we also have a few updates from there, although not as much as last time. So let's begin with the situation in Marinka, which hasn't really changed that much since I last reported that the Russians had cleared out this trench to the north of Pobieda, this one over here. But we do have now confirmation that the Russian forces, in conjunction with the DPR forces that are now considered the First Army Corps, being integrated into the Russian ranks due to the annexation, they were able to take over two new blocks of land. These two specifically, which includes a store and a few apartment buildings. Now, in the grand scheme of things, this doesn't really matter, but in terms of the front line changing, it does. And this means that now the city council is being approached from the south as well as from the east, where there's fighting being held. And this means that sooner or later the Russians will reach Druzhby Avenue, which has really been their goal for a while, as they continue to try to flank Marinka from the north and the south, as I've talked about extensively in other videos. Let's go up to a certain town that I really have not talked about really at all, besides maybe like one video, and that's Krasnohorivka. So there are two Krasnohorivkas. I think this is the smaller one. This one is just to the north of the town of Avdiivka, which is again a very important Ukrainian defensive node. You have some large industrial facilities in the northern part of the town. You have some coal mines, you have some lakes, you have ponds, you have a lot of people that lived here originally. Train hub, 20,000 people probably lived here. And really, it's been very difficult for the Russians to conduct frontal attacks over here, although in recent weeks they've really uptaked and increased the amount of assaults conducted. Not with much success, to be honest, but there has been one area where they have now been successful over the past few days, and that's around Krasnohorivka. So the previous line was around here, so the Russians had control of this town, Novoselivka Druha, which I believe is on a lower elevation, but I will open up the topographic map to confirm. And then from here, the Russians, and I would say mainly the DPR units, because the First Army Corps, aka DPR units, are the ones that are really fighting around Donetsk city, holding the line into trenches and sometimes storming the opposition trenches, although really they haven't been doing much of that over the past few months. But whenever they do, it's usually them in conjunction with Russian artillery and firepower. So I would assume that they were involved in this. You have here the 9 separate Marine Regiment of the DPR, which attacked in the direction of Krasnohorivka, actually in a frontal assault, which is interesting. And they were able to take over this hill over here, which is on a higher elevation, obviously, juxtaposed to Krasnohorivka itself, which means that now Russia has a pretty good sight of Krasnohorivka itself. So maybe we'll see a push into the town itself later on. But taking Krasnohorivka is important, because once you reach Krasnohorivka, you could cut off one of the main supply lines into Avdiivka from the north, if you're able to continue the advance towards the town of Stepove. And then from there, Avdiivka, its possibilities of being supplied are really limited. There is, of course, this one road from Orlivka, and then I'm sure there are minor paths from the open fields. Sooner or later, I'll make some map detailing every single supply line into Avdiivka, but we've not really reached that point yet where the situation is critical for the Ukrainians. They still have a large garrison. They're still holding out on the flanks, specifically the southern one, where Russia has launched numerous assaults onto the mine shaft, and they weren't really successful. But this thus has the possibility of later on developing into a weak point for the Ukrainians. And this would really necessitate the Russians taking over the suburb called Vesele. You don't even see it on Google Maps because it's so small, but I saw it on Map Carta, and so this is just another suburb on the outskirts of Avdiivka that needs to be taken. If we go up a bit north, we have the town of Novobakhmutivka. If you recall, the Russians were able to make some gains over here last week, really taking over most of the town besides the agricultural areas in the western part of the town. And now they've been able to secure some further gains to the north of the town of Novobakhmutivka. They were able to take some of the higher elevated areas to the north of the town over here. And Alexandropol, this town over here, is also on a hill overlooking Novobakhmutivka, which is in a valley. And so securing the open fields to the south of it are important in order to be on equal footing with the Ukrainians, and then later on taking the town for whatever reason. And I think in this era you have the Separate Presidential Brigade, which is one of Ukraine's better units. Now let's go to the topographic map actually to help visualize this. So if you see over here, Novoslivka Druha, as I said, is in the lower elevation. Vasali also in lower elevation. So one of the main routes into Avdiivka is on the valley, and then you have just to the west of that this pretty large hill. Not all of it's been taken by the Russians, but I'm sure they're going to try to take it, because then when you look at Krasnohorovka, most of the town is on a lower elevation, which will make it easier for the Russians to dislodge the town and then reach some of the other higher ground around the northern parts of Avdiivka, which is helping Ukraine secure the town at the moment. If you go to the north, Novobakhmutivka, it is on a valley, and then to the north you have this hill, which extends into Alexandropol over here. Now let's go to the situation specifically in Bakhmut. So really not that much has changed since yesterday, but what I will note is that the Russians have made a new assault in a direction of this town over here called, street called Korunskogo Street, which is basically the same as a T-0504 highway. It just connects into Bakhmut itself. So again, this is one of the means by which Russia is trying to cut off the connectivity of the different forces in Ukraine, trying to cut off one of their last remaining supply lines from Ivanivske to the town of Bakhmut itself. So now the Russians are fighting in these rural dachas over here, pretty close to the farmland and to the parking lot, as you're advancing through this area with a high amount of trees approaching this school, with also many apartment buildings right next to it. So that's the situation over there. If we go to the north, we're seeing that the Wagner Group has been able to break through the Ukrainian lines. The Ukrainians, I really don't know where they're going to regroup. Really, the best bet is just retreating all the way back to Kromove, although that will really tighten the corridor of escape for the remaining Ukrainian garrison in Bakhmut. I don't see how they could hold on to any of the open fields in between Yahidne and Berkivka and Kromove. Also seeing a lot of Ukrainian forces retreat to Bohdanivka. I don't know exactly which units are there, but you could say that there are many that have retreated there in the past few days, and then afterwards probably retreated to Chasiv Yar and Kalinina. So the Wagner Group was able to pierce the Ukrainian lines, take some of the areas adjacent to the Berkivske reservoir, and now they are making this sort of, you see this bulge over here? It is pretty close to the town of Bohdanivka, and this means that they're already trying to assault it, maybe pin down some forces over there as they conduct operations elsewhere. And then also the Russians have positions in Dubovo-Vasilivka, so maybe we'll see an attack from the northern part towards Bohdanivka in the future. And this is just to keep the Ukrainians on their legs, not allowing them to settle down, not allowing them to create any sort of fortifications. And if we look at the topography in the town of Bohdanivka, it does favor the defenders. So let me go to that right now. If you see, this is Berkivka, and then you have Bohdanivka over here. So Bohdanivka itself is on a valley. It's the same valley that Berkivka is on. But once you go further west to Kalinina and to Chasiv Yar, all of this is on a pretty tall hill, which is all around the water canal. And so this is the main Ukrainian defensive line that's going to be set up once the Ukrainians retreat from Bakhmut. And so whatever Ukrainian formations are in Bohdanivka will receive support, whether it be artillery, or field artillery, or snipers, mortars, whatever, from the high ground around the water canal, which will protect them. But either way, the Wagner Group is already trying to create a foothold within the town, so they won't have to deal with it later. That's what it seems like. Now, in terms of the situation in Bakhmut itself, we know that Alexander Siersky, the commander of the eastern grouping of the armed forces of Ukraine, visited the city itself yesterday. I don't know if he left yet. And he talked to the local commanders and officers in the town, and they discussed some of the most pressing issues facing the Ukrainian garrison, if I had to guess. That includes reinforcements, ammo, artillery, logistics, the possibility of retreating, and other such issues that are being faced by the Ukrainians. And this could indicate that really Ukraine is already beginning to set up preparations for a final withdrawal. This would also correspond with the reports we're receiving that the commander-in-chief of the armed forces of Ukraine, Vladimir Zelensky, he informed Zelensky about the critical situation in Bakhmut and talked to him about potential avenues of withdrawal and retreat from the city itself. So we'll have to see if those reports are true in the coming days and if Ukraine actually does decide to withdraw from the town. It will be very interesting to see how they conduct this retreat, and I will be sure to cover it all. So again, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys in another video.